Physiology of deep sea diving. We'll be learning about physiological effect of deep sea diving, nitrogen narcosis, oxygen toxicity, carbon dioxide toxicity, and decompression sickness. We are very well aware of the pressure and volume relationship that is given by the Boyle's law, which states that the pressure of a given quantity of gas varies inversely with its volume at a constant temperature. This Boyle's law is very important in the diving physiology because with the descent beneath the sea level, the pressure is increased, and this increase in pressure can cause decrease in the volume of air that is present in lung, which can cause serious damage. Here we can study the effect of pressure with the sea depth. So you can see at sea level the pressure exerted is 1 atmosphere, and when a person descends to 33 feet beneath the sea level, the atmospheric pressure is 2, and it further increases to a pressure of 4 atmosphere when a person descends to 100 feet. Similarly, another important effect of the depth is on the compression of the gases, as we had talked in the Boyle's law. So when he is at the sea level, you can see the volume of air that is present at sea level is 1 liter, and this volume decreases to a level of half a liter when the person moves to a depth of 33 feet, which further decreases to a volume of 1/4 at 100 feet. So this is very important when we consider in the diving physiology the effect. Here you can see the effect on the lungs because of the increased pressure. With the increase in the pressure, it can lead to the collapse of the air chambers and especially the lungs. You can see the lung volume is decreasing tremendously. In order to keep them in an inflated position and prevent them from collapse, it is very important to give very high pressure to the lungs. So this high pressure will cause the blood in the lungs to be exposed to an extremely high alveolar gas pressure, which is not good if it is beyond a certain limit because it can damage the lung tissue. Beneath the sea, the level of nitrogen, oxygen and carbon dioxide also changes, and certain physiological effects are seen at high pressure. So we'll be discussing each effect one by one. In this oxygen dissociation curve, we can see 3 types of line. One is this in green color, which shows the dissolved oxygen, and we can see beyond 100 millimeters of mercury, the amount of dissolved form of oxygen is increasing linearly. Then we have this red curve that is showing the oxygen that is bound to hemoglobin, that is reaching a plateau phase at 100 to 104, and then it is plateauing here. And third is the line which shows the oxygen content, and we can easily see that the oxygen content of the blood at up till the level of 100 millimeters of mercury is mainly contributed by this oxygen hemoglobin bound form of oxygen, and then beyond 100 millimeters the dissolved form of the oxygen is contributing to the total content of oxygen. With the help of this oxygen hemoglobin dissociation curve, we'll study the effect of high alveolar partial pressure of oxygen on the tissue PO2 level. So let us assume that at 3000 millimeters of partial pressure of oxygen in the lungs, the corresponding oxygen content is 29% or 29% volume. Here you can see this corresponds to point A. Then we have this point B, which corresponds to a partial pressure of 1200 millimeters of mercury and an oxygen content of 24%. This is a point at which the blood is leaving the tissue capillaries. So if we want to calculate the amount of oxygen that is delivered to the tissues, it will be 5 ml for each 100 ml of the blood. Tissue will utilize the normal amount of oxygen. So the important point here is that partial pressure of the oxygen when it leaves the tissue normally is 40 millimeters of the mercury, but here it is 1200 millimeters of the mercury. That means at the level of the tissues, the oxygen delivery is occurring at an extremely high pressure. Now that means oxygen hemoglobin buffer, which was responsible for maintaining the partial pressure in a range of maybe 20 to 60 millimeters, have failed, Therefore, high amount of oxygen will be delivered to the tissue, which may cause oxidation. So, does this high level of partial pressure of oxygen at the alveolar level has any effect on the normal cell functioning? Yes, it does have a detrimental effect, because this amount of high partial pressure at the level of the tissue result in acute oxygen poisoning that results in an increased number of free radical formation, which will cause cell damage and cell death. In a cell, we have free radicals and the antioxidants, which are kept. The free radicals are kept in check by the antioxidants. The free radicals mainly are the peroxide, which is derived from hydrogen peroxide, and the superoxide. And these antioxidants, which are superoxide dismutase, peroxidase, and catalysis, normally keep a check on these free radicals. But when atmospheric pressure increases beyond 2 atmosphere, so what happens, this free radical increases, and the increase of free radical causes the oxidation of lipids in the neuronal membrane. They causes the cellular damage by oxidizing the cellular enzyme, oxidize the cellular membrane, and nervous system has particularly high susceptibility because it has an increased lipid content. Therefore, most of the effect that occurs due to acute oxygen toxicity are mainly on the brain. The lung damage begins at 1 atmospheric pressure if the exposure is more than 12 hours. It starts with the lung congestion, pulmonary edema, and atelectasis. However, when a person breathes oxygen at 4 atmospheric pressure, the effects are more fatal in the form of seizures, coma, disturbed vision, and disorientation. The depth as per se does not increase the carbon dioxide production in the alveoli. The production increases if the gear is not designed properly. That means carbon dioxide will build up in the dead space and it will be rebreathed by the diver, and this will result in an increased partial pressure of carbon dioxide at the level of alveoli that will result in carbon dioxide toxicity. So when carbon dioxide start increasing because of the inappropriate rebreathing apparatus or the diver gear, so this can be compensated up to the level of 80 millimeters of the mercury, where the respiratory rate will be increased because of the stimulation of the neural centers. However, when this is beyond 80 millimeters, then respiratory centers will be rather depressed, and this will result in decrease in the respiratory rate, and decreased respiratory result in increased carbon dioxide buildup, and this will result in severe acidosis, which is known by the name of respiratory acidosis, and finally result in carbon dioxide narcosis and even death or anesthesia. The partial pressure of nitrogen in the blood increases when a person breathes the compressed air for an hour or more in high atmospheric condition. The effects are not seen if a person remains for very short time, because the nitrogen takes time to get dissolved in the body fluid and the tissues. It takes approximately an hour to attain an equilibrium with the water of the body and may require several hours for attaining equilibrium with the fatty tissue. So once it has dissolved in the body fluid and the tissue, then there are several symptoms which are seen because of this nitrogen. You can see that at a level of 4 to 5 atmospheric pressure, the person is jovial and carefree, and when the pressure increases to 6 to 7 atmosphere pressure, then he becomes drowsy. With a further increase of pressure to 7 to 8, then the person becomes fatigued, and ultimately above a atmospheric pressure of 8, it can result in deep nitrogen narcosis, and the person will become unconscious and he will become anesthetized, and he may eventually die because of this condition. Nitrogen gradually dissolves in the body fluid and more easily gets dissolved in the fat. The cell membrane of the neuron, which contain a high lipid content, because of the nitrogen dissolved in the neurons of the brain, it will result in the alteration of the ionic conductance through the membrane. Thereby it will cause a decrease in the neuronal excitability, and finally it will produce nitrogen toxicity, which is also known by the name of nitrogen narcosis, and it mainly causes the brain dysfunction. Unlike oxygen and carbon dioxide, nitrogen is not metabolized by the body. It remains dissolved in all the body tissue. So whenever the pressure returns to the normal, it will be removed by the reverse respiratory process. So when a person descends to beneath the sea level, the amount of nitrogen gets dissolved in the body fluid. It increases in the body fluid and the fat content, and the pulmonary capillaries and the tissue which are present there becomes saturated or attains an equilibrium with the nitrogen. Now the reverse happens when a person ascends back to the sea level. The pressure in the lung decreases back to the normal level, and then nitrogen will be removed by the reverse respiratory process. However, this results in a multiple problem which are known by the name of decompression sickness. So we have nitrogen narcosis when the person is descending beneath the sea, and we have decompression sickness because of the rapid ascent of a person to the sea level. So let's understand the physiology of decompression sickness. This figure has been taken from Guyton. Here we can see a lung of a diver which has been exposed to a high pressure of 5000 millimeters of mercury, and we can see that 97% of the pressure is contributed by that of nitrogen. The gaseous pressure of the body fluids is 3918 for that of nitrogen. So what happens when a person remains at this level? The nitrogen is dissolved in his body tissue and body fat and does not cause any problem. So whenever there is a sudden decompression, that is a diver suddenly tries to ascend to the sea level, what will happen? The pressure on the outside of the body, as you can see, is 760 millimeters of mercury or 1 atmosphere, whereas beneath the sea level it was the pressure was 4065. So what will happen? A pressure is obviously greater at beneath the sea level, therefore the gas will try to escape from the dissolved form in the form of bubbles, and we know the major 97% of the gas that is dissolved here is nitrogen. So this nitrogen tries to escape from the dissolved state and forms bubbles which are composed entirely of nitrogen, and these bubbles appear within hours because earlier they were in supersaturated form. So these bubbles tries to come out, and then they will go into various tissue and blood vessels and cause the blocking of these tissue that results in. You may be aware with this phenomena in which the dissolved gases in a liquid try to escape in the form of bubbles when the lid of the bottle is open. So similar situation or the similar analogy can be applied to the nitrogen gas, which we know is dissolved in the diver who is present at the greater sea depth. So when this diver tries to ascend suddenly, what will happen? The nitrogen bubbles will be formed in the body fluid either intracellularly or the extracellular tissue. This is because these gases try to escape from the dissolved state. So the actual bubbles are formed which are composed entirely of nitrogen. These bubbles may block the small blood vessels, and later they may coalesce together and affect the larger blood vessels. So the plugging in of these tissues and the blood vessel may result in infarction and ischemia, and may result in emboli, and sometimes results in death. And therefore this phenomena, multiple syndromes which are caused, is known by the name of decompression sickness, also known by the name of Bend's, compressed air sickness, Kazan disease, or the diver's paralysis. And this is seen especially in a diver who has been in sea for a long time, and then there is a sudden ascent of that person to a sea level. The decompression sickness is divided into three main categories depending upon the sign and symptoms. The most fatal of these is the decompression sickness type 3, in which there is an air gas embolism formation. This is a list of symptoms which are caused by decompression sickness, and it is caused basically by the gas bubbles which block many blood vessels in the different tissues. When the air bubble escape into the joint, it results in the destruction of the cartilage, therefore resulting in the pain, which is seen in 85 to 90% patient, and this pain causes the bending posture of the patient, and therefore it is also known by the name of bends. And this pain is more so associated when the person is performing some activity. Five to 10% of the patient with decompression sickness presents with nervous symptom ranging from dizziness to unconsciousness or paralysis and collapse. The paralysis seen here is a temporary paralysis because of the presence of nitrogen bubble in the myelin sheath of the motor nerve. The disease also derives its name diver's palsy because of this paralysis which is seen. The microbubbles, when they block the pulmonary circulation, result in a very serious condition which is known by the name of chokes, and as the name suggests, there is shortness of breath which can be followed by pulmonary edema, and occasionally this results in death of the patient. During the descent, water pressure increases against the eardrum, and when it is transmitted to the middle ear, it results in middle ear squeeze that creates an uncomfortable vacuum in the middle ear, and when it is transferred to the oval or the round window, it may result in the rupture of these, leading to vertigo and sometimes even permanent hearing loss. This is seen in a patient with decompression sickness because of the presence of air bubbles in the cutaneous circulation. In order to prevent the decompression sickness, the nitrogen elimination from the body can be governed by the decompression tables. It basically involves the principle of the slow ascent from the deep sea, which will cause the elimination of nitrogen usually by the expiration process. The lungs will be able to eliminate the nitrogen in a timed fashion, that is 2/3 of the nitrogen is liberated within 1 hour and 90% of it is expired out in 6 hours. So this can be followed. In order to facilitate the nitrogen expiration through the lung, these are the decompression tables which are available, and they are followed as per the schedule. The mainstay of treatment for the decompression sickness is hydration, hyperbaric oxygen therapy, 100% oxygen administration, and recompression chambers. In a diver who develops the symptom of the decompression sickness, he is placed in a pressurized tank, and then lowering of the pressure is gradually done to bring it back to the normal atmospheric pressure, and the schedule that is followed is same as that of the decompression table. We have saturation divers who work at a deep level between 250 to 1000 feet, and they do not suffer from decompression sickness. So what is the basis for this? The saturation divers, or the trained divers, who frequently live in a large compression chamber, as you can see here, for days or week. This results in them being exposed to the pressure at which they'll be working later, and also it keeps their body fluid and the tissues saturated with the gases to which they'll be exposed. So when they come after work to the same tank, there will be no changes in the pressure and no decompression bubbles will be formed. Further, these saturation divers use helium as a gas mixture instead of nitrogen. This is so because helium has 1/5 the narcotic effect of nitrogen. Secondly, half of the volume of helium dissolves in the body tissue as compared with that of nitrogen. And thirdly, the low density of helium keeps the airway resistance for the breathing at a minimum level. So these are the advantages why helium is used instead of nitrogen. Scuba diving is a mode of underwater diving where a diver uses a self-contained underwater breathing apparatus. It is independent of the surface supply because the tank contains the compressed air, mainly the heliox, which is a mixture of oxygen and helium. The limitation of scuba diving is the amount of time one can spend beneath the sea level. This is the reference material for today's lecture.